Anthony Albanese has returned to Australia after his official state visit to the US. The Prime Minister was warmly welcomed by the President Joe Biden at the White House with the state dinner, and the two leaders reflected on the relationship between the two countries. The visit made headlines here, of course, even dominated them, but did it register for many Americans in the US? Joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff and now Bondi Partners consultant, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, great to see you, as always. So, did Americans even know about this state dinner? How did the local media cover it?
The DC local media would not have covered it in the various cities and states and so forth. It would be the national media out of Washington, D.C., and they covered it in sort of a passing way. Keep in mind, there's big things happening, most specifically what's happening in Israel right now, and that's dominating our news cycle. You go to the next level of stories, and it's about Donald Trump and the 2024 election. So you have to get fairly low down into the news shows to talk about other topics. So yes, the news covered the fact that there was a meeting, but it was sort of, oh, and by the way, Joe Biden was having an official dinner with Australia, and here's what he had to say that day about Israel. So it got some coverage, but not much. I will tell you this: I was in Washington, D.C., and there were Australian flags everywhere. So Washington certainly knew what was going on. Did not make many headlines here in the United States.
Yeah, look, I was in New York and Miami. I've got to tell you, didn't make headlines there either. But I'll tell you what, we haven't spoken about the new speaker yet. Who is it? And is it smooth sailing from here on in Congress?
It's somebody you've never heard of, because it was somebody I had pretty much never heard of. His name is Mike Johnson from Louisiana. He was, I think, the fifth candidate to run for the speaker. He seems like a really good guy, more conservative, from the conservative wing of the party. Not that makes a difference. What's important now, Laura, is that we have a Speaker of the House, and business not only can resume in the United States House of Representatives, but has resumed. They've already passed a non-binding resolution supporting Israel, and they expect to take up financial support for Israel as soon as this week. So that little crisis seems to be behind them. Is it any more stable? I think it probably is. I've talked to a bunch of members of Congress, and they have very little appetite to do this again anytime soon. So my guess is the speaker will be in place at least for the next 15 months until the next election.
And what is the divide, if any, on giving more money to Israel and potentially the US getting involved in another protracted war? I don't have any intelligence.
Yeah, that's not the divide.
What is the divide?
That's not the divide. The divide is the way that the White House asked for the money. The White House sends all supplemental funding requests begin with our president. He has to ask Congress for special money, extra money above a budgeted amount. So when he sent down his request late last week, it was for $105 billion, which is a huge amount of money. Only 14 of that was for Israel. The largest portion of that, 60 billion, was for Ukraine. And there's a lot of members in Congress, including folks in both parties, who aren't really comfortable with putting those two things together. They'd like to have a separate vote on Israel and then another vote again on Ukraine. So my guess is that's the way that it's going to play out. Instead of voting all on this one bill at one time, both will pass, but by different vote totals.
Yeah, right. Okay, so what about the presidential race? We've still got to keep an eye on that. It's not far away. Now, what we had? Mike Pence drop out of the race and Nikki Haley doing a little bit better?
Yeah, Mike Pence has dropped out, which surprised a lot of people, myself included. He was in Las Vegas giving a speech on something entirely different and announced sort of off the cuff. I doubt it was really off the cuff, but it sounded like it was at the end of the speech that he was suspending his campaign. He was not going to qualify, Laura, for the next debate in Miami. And that's pretty much the kiss of death in the Republican primary. So it doesn't come as a surprise. It just came as a surprise that it happened on that particular time. Nikki Haley is doing a lot better. However, she's stealing mostly votes from Ron DeSantis. The most recent national poll I've seen has Donald Trump actually doing better than he did a month ago, as high as 58 or 59% amongst Republicans. So while Nikki Haley certainly is moving into a stronger second position, she's still 40 or 50 points behind Donald Trump, who's still the smart money to be the Republican nominee.
Yeah, right. So a year out, essentially, it's going to be Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or do you have doubts about that latter name I mentioned?
So a name that no one has ever heard of, including here in this country, Dean Phillips. And I'd never really heard of him. He's a Democrat congressman from Minnesota. He's in his first or second term. No one knows who this guy is. He announced for president over the weekend. as a Democrat running against Joe Biden. He's the first legitimate contender against Joe Biden. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was running against him. He's sort of a fringe candidate. He's since announced that he's going to run as an independent, not as a Democrat. But there is now a real Democrat in the race against Joe Biden. And the discussion here is whether or not this will represent the dam breaking. And many of the Democrat names that you and I have talked about, the governor of California, the governor of Michigan, the governor of Illinois, big Democrat names might be waiting to get in now that someone else has gone first. This will be very interesting to watch.
Okay. Should we expect other names, other Democrats over the next year, do you reckon? I mean, I just can't see how Joe Biden can go for another term and how the American people will go for it.
He did a really nice job, LJ, on the handling of the first weeks of the war in Israel, including not only a visit to Israel, but a really good speech from the Oval Office. I've scheduled a couple of these.
And a good interview too, I would say. A good interview.
A great interview. And his approval ratings went down. I'm not making that up. He's simply not able. He is not able to get over the age issue right now. The economy, while doing well on paper here, isn't translating because inflation is still very high. And his approval ratings, even amongst Democrats, is going down. So the Democrats are, as a party now, are really starting to ask a lot more questions in public as to whether or not they can ride Joe Biden through another election cycle, or whether or not they use this Dean Phillips intervention into the race as an excuse to sort of let in all the big names that might be legitimate contenders for the presidency.
Sounds like the beginning of the end to me. Mick Mulvaney, we will speak soon. Good to see you.